For some reason or other, they
doing online. I've done one other online kind of webinar, and there's two things I find quite different. One is that usually when I do a talk, I'm chatting with you all and I'm looking for responses back. And I might be asking you questions, but of course I can't do that. And the other one is that quite a lot of times the screens, all your screens are black. So I feel like I'm talking to myself. But look, that's just all part of the strange times we're in. Thank you very much for joining us today. Really appreciate you getting up and switching on the laptops or phones. Thanks to Carlow Mental Health Association for inviting me to talk. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dee Sewell. I have a self-employed business, Greenside Up, which I started in 2009. I started it with the intention of helping people to grow their own food more successfully and I suppose with more luck, if you like. But when I was sitting down trying to figure out what I would be chatting about today, it was actually Monday was my day at home to sit and plan this, and it was the day that we heard that we might be going back to level 5, and cheapers, my stress levels were through the roof. I couldn't concentrate at all. I kind of came out with an idea for a talk and then abandoned it, and then I was out walking and I just thought, you know, I'm just going to share my experiences with you of how I created my garden and how it affected me in different ways. And then if you're you know, if you are planning to start growing food or have started, then maybe some of the tips and things that I share you'll might be of help to you. So so I guess these are the kind of areas I'm going to be covering this morning. I have to keep an eye on the time actually, because I've got quite a lot I'm packing in here, but hopefully a good opportunity for some questions at the end. So I'm going to look about, can gardening create stress? In my case it did actually. The importance of keeping it small and manageable, about restoring the natural balance between the gardens, us, our health, nature, and why that's important. I'm going to look a little bit about the science behind all of that, and then evolving gardens, how to begin and how we can plan for better experiences. So to begin, this was my garden, this is my veg garden, probably about 12 years ago. I was trying to think when I took this picture, 10, yeah, maybe 12 years ago. It was the back garden. It was my pride and joy. I'd always wanted to have a lovely vegetable garden, and we moved here and we had this bit of a field out the back, a bit of a back garden, and started to create this. And it was an oasis. I had 3 kids under 10 at the time. I was a stay-at-home mammy, and this was how I spent my outdoors time really. And it was important for us because I suppose primarily, perhaps like many people, when I had children, I wanted to give them the best food that I could and the best start in life. And at the time we couldn't afford organic vegetables, so I wanted to grow them at home. And this was kind of one of the best pictures, I suppose, but it really was a joy to go out to this garden and have a look and work there. But there were a couple of points, I suppose a couple of things happened. It was very high maintenance. There were 17 veg beds here with the polytunnel, which was great when I was at home and not having to go out and about too much. Lots of time to do them. We had everything growing there. There's potatoes there in the front. There's with a hedge all around. There's kind of a bit of everything in this garden, and we had an abundance of food. But then as my youngest started school and I decided to head back to adult learning and study horticulture, my time became less and less, and I just wasn't able to get out there. This actually ended up creating quite a massive toll on my health in the end, because there I was. We often used to joke in classes. I've been working with community gardens and people would joke like, how's your garden? Must be amazing. And I think, jeepers, my garden, it's it's just not really up to scratch. And we'd say it's a bit like an electrician where, you know, you're out fixing everybody's electrics and you've got no lights at home. And that's really what happened with my garden. So the next slide is how that same space looked 2 years ago. So you can imagine possibly the stress that created of knowing that I was outside, going with other groups and gardens, and you know, teaching people how to grow food. And this is what I was coming home to. And I was having to go and buy vegetables. And if any of you are growing food, you'll know how devastating it is if you actually have to go and buy courgettes from a supermarket, because courgettes grow in abundance once you have them set. So this was this was last year, and it had kind of got to that stage the year before. I suppose that if I do always try and think of a positive, and if there's one positive here, it's that it was a bit of an oasis for nature when it turned into this. You know, in itself, it could be considered quite lovely. We had hedgehogs. I haven't used chemicals here. Yeah, so this was a couple of years ago, actually last year. And I was just saying that we haven't used any chemicals at all up here outside and very few inside for the last, we were trying to figure it out, about 18 years. When we moved up here and not really knowing any different, we had this little bit of a field and a farmer said, oh, you need to spray it with Roundup and kill everything off and then re-sow it, put grass seed down. And that's kind of, I suppose, naively what we did. But so I was able to see the effect that had on nature around us. And I didn't like what happened with everything dying, etc. So that was the last time we put a chemical out here. So that was a couple of years ago. And this was the polytunnel. Stormophilia finished off the polytunnel. And that was kind of awful, really. And the guilt and stress I carried around with me was enormous. And I really only appreciated that probably towards the end of last year, the effect it was having on me. And like many people, when they're stressed and unhappy, they start eating. So everything that was precious to me was all just going down the pan. So I suppose it was last autumn, as this became apparent, I said, right, next year in the springtime, we're going to sort this out. I actually had gone back to college in September to study landscape design. So I was able to use the new tips and skills I was learning and bring them home and look at how I could change our whole setup and make it more usable, easier to manage, and to get back on track. Thankfully, in hindsight, I mean, you wonder how these things happen. For Christmas, I kind of couldn't think, what do you want for Christmas? As you get older, it's hard to think of things that you might want. And I said to the husband, can I have some seeds? I'd like some organic seeds so that in the springtime we can get sorted. I'd actually bought new plastic for the polytunnel last summer, but we hadn't had an opportunity to put it up. So lo and behold, at Christmas, this lovely box of seeds arrived and onions and garlic. And I thought, right, I really am going to have to sort this garden out. But it's daunting, like, to look at something like that. Where do you even begin? But what I did know and what I had learnt was that I'd allowed this garden to get too big. And one of the very first things people will say if you're going to start growing food, and I have said many, many times to many, many groups, don't start too big, start small. See what you can manage, and then add to it if you've got the time and the energy and the fitness, I suppose. I had started big because I had got the time, but then I needed to row it back. And in hindsight, perhaps rather than just give up and let it all go to seed, I could have just covered half the beds and just worked on a few beds. But look, hindsight is a great thing, isn't it? And hopefully, as I say, the things that I've learned, I can share with you all. So I decided, and it took me some time actually, to persuade the husband to, instead of having a veg garden in the field behind, which is just behind this wall here, I wanted to turn our front lawn into a vegetable garden. He it's not that he was precious about the lawn, but he couldn't really see the lawn in any other way than this was the front garden. When we moved here, we live in an old farmhouse, and this area here was originally just a farmyard courtyard covered in pebbles and stones. We'd laid it to lawn and just put a square of ornamental flowers and shrubs around it, and that's kind of how it's looked. But actually, this in itself was quite high maintenance. We're living 3,000 feet above sea level, and it can be quite damp. We're in the clouds quite a lot, so opportunities to mow this lawn were quite limited. So the lawn often was just looking very large and not large, it was looking very overgrown. You couldn't get out with the mower, it was quite soft. And so that in itself caused stresses. So, so all these stresses from the garden. Anyway, finally, I managed to persuade my husband to allow us, I suppose, to get rid of the lawn and to grow vegetables here instead. COVID has been terrible for many people, but in this one respect, it was amazing for us because it allowed us the time to actually get to work and create this changes that I had been longing for. So that was the garden in, well, that was last year, but with the lockdown, this is what we turned it into. This was the end of April this year. So for most of March, we were extremely lucky in that we had planned for this. We'd ordered the wood, I'd ordered topsoil or compost, and we managed to get it in just as that full lockdown went down. So we had lots of time to be able to do this. I'll be talking shortly about the processes, about how we went about this and the decisions and things. But this immediately, the tension of having to mind a veg garden was lifted, because this particular layout, it's just so easy maintenance. It's so easy to look after. You can walk around all the beds. You can get to all the beds easily. There's not as many weeds because they're raised. It's the beds are warmer. They warm up faster. And because underneath that lawn, it would have been very pebbly and stony, you kind of need a pickaxe to get through it. We were able to lift up and bring fresh organic compost. It was actually organic soil improver that we were able to bring in and fill these beds. So that was probably around about the end of April. It's amazing. Nature's amazing, isn't it? When you see, I look back at these photos and there's all the beds around are very empty. And then the next pictures are as it's starting to develop. So we've got the early summer here on the left, and then the picture on the right was last week. So we have pretty much everything growing in here. There is more than enough food in this in these beds for us. We have, I think I've got the next slide. So I took this picture these photos last week. So just in those beds alone, and each of the beds are around about 4 meters long, so pretty much filled the lawn. We have celery, celeriac, there's rainbow charge, there was beetroot, carrots. I have purple sprout and broccoli, cauliflower, sprouts, turnips, kale. There were onions, French beans, runner beans, peas, mange tout. We managed to pack all of that into that relatively small space. And there's water nearby because it's near the house. Because it's near the house, we're able to just pop out and pick things. The only thing that we haven't done yet, which is still on the plan, is to get rid of the grass completely that's around all the beds, and to put some weed membrane down and some stones. And that will really make it as low maintenance as I can get it. Also, because of where it's situated now in amongst all the ornamentals, we have so many different insects visiting. This is just a picture of one plant. It's an echinops. Echinops, by the way, is really, really attracted to all pollinating insects. And you can see that the flowers are just starting to go off here. They're losing their colour. But every single flower was covered in something. And in some cases, 2, 3 or 4 different bees or butterflies or hoverflies absolutely love this. And this is going on all around my veg garden. So it's attracting pollinating insects that are then going to help to pollinate, but also it's attracting all of these flowers and ornamentals are attracting beneficial insects then that are going to deal with the predators. So if you don't use chemicals in the garden, you need to be attracting beneficial insects and wildlife in too. And by having a veg garden that's surrounded by shrubs and flowers that do attract these guys in, then it's good for everybody. It's good for all of us. The only pest that I really had in this garden this year was initially when we dug it over, Jeepers leather jackets, the little grub that cranefly leave in the lawn. I'm not sure if it's because if they will manage to burrow their way out of the lawn, or pure chance, but buckets and buckets of leather jackets were being picked out of the soil, of the new soil, fed to the chickens. And then later on we did net the brassica crops, or the cabbage and kales and things from the cabbage white butterfly, but because everything grew so big and so large in the new soil that they burst out of the netting, and the butterfly was able to get in and lay caterpillars. So I'm still picking off caterpillars now, and again the hens are enjoying those. But really they're the only 2 pests we've suffered. And as I say, everything has just been amazing out there. So that kind of leads me a bit into restoring the balance. I don't know if any of you have had a chance to have a look yet, but there's a film on Netflix called Kiss the Ground. It's being narrated by Woody Harrelson. I've actually ordered the video, so or the DVD. If you haven't an opportunity to see Netflix and are interested in seeing the film, drop me a line and I can maybe try and arrange a screening of it when it arrives. But it's about how we can restore that natural balance to nature and for nature. There's a link there to the trailer. I could, maybe at the end, I'll drop a link into the chat bar to the trailer of the film. And what it did for me watching this, it's only recently released, it gives us hope, because there's so much going on with the environment and the planet and climate change and everything, that it can be very easy to be overwhelmed by everything. And this film gave me some hope. It talks about how we can store carbon in the soil and how that in turn will help to take it out of the atmosphere. And this is something that's, there's new regenerative agriculture groups are growing as people start to realize the connection between carbon being released from the soils that are currently being overworked, and how we can change that. Healthy soils and healthy seeds will give us healthy plants, and they in turn help to give us good health. We're interconnected. And it's only, I guess, in recent years, as science is becoming more clever, as there's more microscopes are able to get smaller, and scientists are learning more and more about how we work and how everything works and how we're interconnected.
And research institutions in delivering antivirals.
If you're coming in, if there's new people coming in, can we just ask you to mute yourselves as Dee is talking? Sorry, Dee.
That's okay, and we'll have an opportunity at the end for chat and questions. I'm recording this at the moment, and we'll take it off record at the end. So yeah, more research is coming in there now. We know that there's more bacteria and living beings in a teaspoon of soil than there are people who've lived on this planet. But it's really, as I say, it's really only in recent years that we're discovering this and we're able to understand them. Last year, papers were published that revealed that our gut bacteria is directly linked to our mental well-being and depression, which indicates that the foods that we are eating directly influences our mood. And I know in my own case, this, as I've been able to, this is all organic, we're growing organic food in organic soil, we're bringing it straight in and we're cooking it straight away. It's definitely affecting how I'm feeling, and I can absolutely say that without any doubt that I've been feeling a lot better since I've been improving the food that I'm eating. They say that the human microbiome is that lives in our gut. It's full of a complex of bacteria and viruses, fungi, yeasts, and it actually this microbiome weighs more than our brain, and there are some doctors that are suggesting that this could almost be a second brain. But when we feed our guts good food, we're feeding the bacteria in there good food, that in turn is then feeding our brains with better, I suppose, better thoughts, but it's just improving how we feel. And I think that's something that we maybe lost sight of over the years as industrial and chemical agriculture took hold. But thankfully, you know, that is starting to trickle out to everybody, and maybe we can change that. So really, what better time to think about growing our own food? You know, we know that if we now look after soils more carefully, it's going to help the planet. If we look after the seeds and the plants that are growing, it's better for us. And really just, I mentioned the film because it kind of brings all that together and explains it in a very easy and manageable way, which hopefully will trickle out and inspire people. So I mentioned there about surrounding the garden and the veg garden, the edible gardens with beneficial plants. And I'm sure many of you have heard there's the pollinators.ie have an amazing resource on their website to help people grow better plants or more beneficial plants, not necessarily better, but more beneficial plants. This slide here is just one of many on their resource section. It explains some of the plants that are good for pollinators and wildlife. And it's very handy if you're thinking about starting a garden. Very important to include the shrubs as well if you haven't. Shrubs create the backbone of a garden area. And I was chatting with one of the guys in the local garden centre a couple of years ago, and he was saying that people have stopped buying shrubs because they're so, they've been so caught up with the creation of instant gardens that shrubs have kind of lost their popularity. So just bear in mind, if you can get a good backbone of shrubs around your garden, and then put in all the fillers, that in turn it gives places for wildlife, hedgehogs, etc., to hide away. But also many shrubs like the berberis there would attract bees as well. So if you're going to start off from scratch and you're looking at living with nature rather than fighting nature, there's a few observations that you need to be doing and making in the garden. It really helps to understand your soil type, and I'm not going into details of how you do this today. There's loads of videos, I've written loads of blogs about it on the website, but you'll have to have a look and see maybe how to find out what your soil type is. As I mentioned there in our new raised bed garden, I knew that it was actually hard to get to our soil because it was buried beneath rocks. So I ordered some enriched compost from a local supplier. It's actually a soil conditioner, it's all I could get hold of, and brought that in. And when you're buying good quality topsoil without fertilizers, it's a good start. But if you don't do that and you're going straight into the soil, then knowing whether you've got clay or sandy soil will help determine what kind of seeds you might buy. many of you might know, carrots prefer sandier soil. So like us, we're very heavy clay out in the back garden, and I could never plant any long tap-rooted carrots. They just wouldn't grow. I'd have to choose little round Dorcas carrots or small early carrots. Knowing where the sun is coming every day and throughout the year is helpful to see if you're in shade or for how long of the day you're in shade. Most veg prefers to be in some sunshine or lots of sunshine, depending. And wind is probably the biggest destructor, and winds seem to be getting higher and harder. So putting in hedging or wind barriers around your garden will help anything growing within it. Polytunnel, I showed a picture there earlier of the polytunnel that Ophelia got. When we first put it up, we didn't have very much wind protection. We'd only just put a hedge around the garden. So it was really battered by southwesterly winds. But as the plants grew, that all helped. But unfortunately for that first polytunnel, it didn't get the life that we might have, we're hoping the second one will. Understanding your garden and the creatures live in it, that's kind of important too. And what we did find was that when we stopped all the chemicals, we attracted more and more wildlife in. That possibly also helped that our dogs at the time were older, so creatures were braver about coming in. Now we've 2 younger dogs, and I've had to, if you've seen photos of the new garden that I showed you there, I have another slide coming up, where we had electric fence posts, not electrified actually, but just scattered around and string, trying to keep the dogs out of the garden because they've been used to using the lawn. Right plant, right place. So again, understanding your soil type and what direction the garden is facing will help you to determine whether you've got the right plants in. I would have spent so much money years ago putting the wrong plant in the wrong place, seeing a lovely plant in a garden centre or a garden festival, bringing it home, sticking it over by the wall, and then finding it was in constant shade and it was never going to grow. It needed to be in the sun. So just kind of observing garden. And I suppose because we're not able to get out as much as we would have done before, we have more time to be able to sit in the gardens or spend time and just make these simple observations of how our gardens are looking. And then finally make the pledge to ditch all the chemicals. I was with a group yesterday and they were saying, can we not just spray the paths? In fact, this is coming up quite a lot recently as the way weeds have been growing. We just want to spray the paths off, but wildlife doesn't see the barriers. They don't see that there's a path there or there's the flower bed there. They're flying in and around and over all of the exit areas. So we just have to look at alternatives, and there are many alternatives. It's just, and again, if you search online now, that you can find many alternatives to using chemicals. It's just, I think we've got very used to using them. It was a very easy option, certainly a very quick option to spray a path off rather than hand weed it. But if we think about the longer term effects of that, then it's encouraging to make changes. So I just wanted to share this slide. This talks about the processes involved on how we did come to the design of this new garden here, and how it came to be. So in the bottom corner there, I drew a plan. So this is a fairly fancy looking plan. As I mentioned, I was studying landscape design at the time, so I was able to put into practice some of the skills that I was learning. But before I did this, I would have been drawing plans by hand. And I don't know if you can make out on there, I've put which way the sun is facing, which way the wind is coming, where my water points are. And we just went out and we measured the lawn, basically, and decided how big a space we had that we could actually use for this new garden. The top slide there with the graph, on the graph paper, that was once we had measured the lawn area, we knew how big it was going to be, came indoors, got a bit of graph paper and started playing with shapes. Now I did this on PowerPoint. I use PowerPoint quite a lot for basic design stuff, I suppose. But equally, we could, equally, you can cut out pieces of paper. And I'd really advise you do this if you're looking at starting a new garden. You can just cut pieces of paper to scale, different sizes, and just move them around on the piece of paper within the space that you have. This particular design was probably the 6th one that we came up with. We tried straight beds, side-by-side beds, all different versions, but because it was the front garden, we wanted it to look a bit interesting as well. I've left, it's just less than a metre between all the beds, but if accessibility was an issue, we would have had to leave slightly bigger, probably 1 metre to 1.5 metres, maybe, if we were getting wheelchairs around there. The beds are raised. They're from timber from the local timber yard. They're pressure treated and painted with a plant-friendly treatment. What else can I tell you? All of the beds are 1.2 metres apart and in width. And the reason for that is so that we never have to stand on them. We can always walk around them to work on them. And this is much better for all the soil that's living within, all the creatures that are in the soil. It's better for the soil. We don't compact the soil when we're walking on it. All the worms and bacteria and everything is happy in there because it's not overly being disturbed. So they're all 1.2 metres. And then, as I say, the longer stretches here in this instance are about 4 metres long. And then moving down to the last image there on the bottom corner, this is how we began. So we had it on paper. We got the wood. My husband then went out and chopped it, put it into place. We laid all the wood down, and then we covered all of the grass with cardboard. And that enabled, as soon as we covered the grassy areas, that killed off, that began to kill the grass and any weeds growing beneath there. Plants need sunlight to grow, photosynthesize. So by covering them, you're going to stop that growth. If you think of a tent, if you've been camping and you've left a tent there for a week or two, and when you lift it, you can see that the grass is already starting to die off, and cardboard will have the same effect. But be sure to make sure that the cardboard is covering every little scrap of grass, because otherwise it will try and poke its way through. Okay. And then I suppose this is just, this slide is just an indication of some of other areas, I suppose. I showed you there how the front garden was performing. We made a decision not to plant very much in the old allotment. We've actually covered that older area now with a weed membrane to kill off the grass. That we trimmed all of the overgrown weeds and everything right down. We covered them with a weed fabric, and we're now adding a well-rotted manure under that weed fabric just to feed the soil over the winter months. We did clear a couple of strips that we planted some potatoes and some onion and garlic. This is garlic that I harvested there probably August time. Garlic grows really well in Ireland. You really don't need to buy garlic. I think Mick Kelly from GIY often talks about how garlic started his whole grow it yourself movement. And I first grew garlic in containers before we had a garden. So that's one to think of. The polytunnel, again, that contained, once we got the new fabric on it, it contains flowers as well as vegetables. And that's, as I say, introducing food sources for any insects that can come in and then pollinate the pumpkin, the squashes and courgettes and other foods that's in there. The poppies at the front just reseeded, actually. I didn't plant those. And we thought we'd done an amazing job of weeding the polytunnel, and it's amazing what came back that was living in the soil bank once we actually got started with it. And then, so this was just one of the dinners that I harvested. This is my dinner in kit form a couple of weeks ago. Again, as I say, taken from the garden. I should say, actually, my kids now, I hate me for saying this, 17, 19 and 21. The older one and the younger one, the older one will eat everything that comes out the garden. The middle one, she, I think, ate one vegetable that comes out of the garden here, and the younger one ate 2 vegetables. So it's still an ongoing battle. All I keep hoping is that we've laid the seed for them, that all that, you know, for all these years we have been growing this food and dishing it up to them. They might be fussy now, but hopefully they'll come back to it. And I know one of the kids now is, you know, he's really interested in growing food and will come out and help me. So hopefully it all comes around. The plan at the moment now, as the beds are we're starting to harvest food and there's gaps, I'm going to be adding some more well-rotted manure or some compost, some soil improver to the beds and covering them with cardboard over the winter just to keep the weeds down. And again, in the springtime, it's so much easier then just to lift the cardboard and open it up and get sowing again, rather than to head out there in February or March when it's dull and dreary and think, oh jeepers, we've got to do all this weeding again. So the more organised we can be thinking about going forwards, the better. I'm also about to write a diary note of everything that worked for us, everything that didn't, all the foods that we had too much of and things that we could have grown more, and that will help me next year in next year's planning. And then I suppose lastly, we learnt the lesson at the beginning of lockdown when seeds suddenly became really hard to get hold of. You know, be organised and get your seeds in, seed orders in now. With Brexit happening as well, we're going to get a double whammy with people wanting seeds and not being able to get seeds for England, from England, as import tariffs, etc. kick in. So that's just something to bear in mind.